For years, people have been moving to Florida in record numbers, but in 2025, those numbers tell a little bit of a different story. And believe it or not, the reasons for this shift are actually pretty obvious, but what they mean for the future might not be. So today I'm breaking down exactly what's going on in Florida, why people are leaving, and what it really means if you already live here or plan on making a move here soon. By the way, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on life in South Florida, new developments, and everything that you need to know about moving here. So before we talk about the current reality, let's take a step back and zoom back out to 2020 through 2022, or what I call the boom years. South Florida was the place to be, and then a once-in-a-lifetime event turned the housing market completely upside down. Remote work became the new norm, and all of a sudden you had hundreds of thousands of people realizing they didn't have to live through another winter or pay New York or California taxes anymore. And because of that, Florida's net migration exploded, gaining roughly 250,000 people in just one single year. That's more than we've seen since 2005, and a massive portion of them came right here to South Florida. But the reasons were obvious. No state income tax, homes were still more affordable than what buyers were used to paying up north or out west, even with prices climbing, and of course the lifestyle. On top of that, Miami was in the middle of a business boom. Brickell became known as Wall Street South, bringing in big names from finance and tech and creating jobs that brought professionals from all over the world. It was this perfect storm of opportunity, and for a while it felt like it was never gonna end. But like a lot of things, too much of a good thing can change what made things good in the first place. And that's exactly what's happening right now in 2025. For the first time in years, the Miami metro area ranks third in the country for most people moving away, and Florida's net migration has dropped to just 1.1 inbound for every one outbound move, which is a massive change from the boom years. But here's where the story shifts. People aren't leaving because they all of a sudden hate Florida. The truth is they're leaving because the things that drew them here in the first place are now starting to work against them. And housing is the big one. Housing costs have skyrocketed in the last 5 years, nearly doubling in some areas. Remember early 2021 when a home had 10 offers in the first hour of it being on the market? For sellers, it was like winning the lottery. For buyers, it was kind of a nightmare, but a nightmare that a lot of us wish that we can go back to. So even with inflation slowing in 2025, home prices are still at record highs, keeping a lot of buyers on the sidelines. Factor in association fees and insurance, and you have a lot of people that are either just not choosing to come here anymore or being forced to leave. But here's the thing, it's not just housing, it's also the overall cost of living. Florida was once one of the most affordable places to live in the country. We now rank 48th when it comes to affordability. Groceries, gas, utilities, car insurance. It's all more expensive than it was when I first moved here, and that cheaper than New York mentality, it just doesn't hit the way it used to. Now, when you zoom out, South Florida still is a lot more affordable than a lot of cities across the US. But there is one major problem that wipes that out almost completely, and that's jobs and salaries. They're not good here, if I'm being completely honest. And they were okay about 10 years ago when it was a little bit more comparable to the cost of living, but salaries are that one thing that failed to increase along with everything else. Now, as far as jobs go, there definitely isn't a shortage of work down here, but whether you get paid in proportion to what you think you're worth or what you're used to, that's a whole other story. And that's a big reason why a lot of people move to South Florida with an entrepreneurial mentality of starting their own business. However, we all know how entrepreneurship is, and because of this, a lot of people who move down here with big dreams or big goals wind up leaving after a year or two of fighting it out. And that's about where we are right now. And I preach a lot on this channel about not moving down here without having your job situation figured out or having a job lined up so this doesn't happen to you. But people do it anyway, so all I can say is at least do your research and understand what you're getting yourself into. Now let's say you clear that hurdle, you got the job, you started the business, you got the income, you're doing well. That's only half the battle. The real test comes in the day-to-day reality of actually living here. Because once the honeymoon phase wears off, that's when you start to notice the cracks in the system. And that Florida that you dreamt of before you moved down here or on moving day, maybe your first couple weeks out here, that's when things start to change a little bit. The roads are congested, schools are overcrowded, and those hidden gem towns that nobody knew about are now suddenly on everybody's radar. And it almost feels like nobody works here. You know that midweek calm you get when on a Tuesday afternoon you can go out to the store at 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and nobody's on the roads and nobody's at the store? You don't get that down here. It almost feels like nobody has a job. But obviously, like I mentioned, there's a lot of entrepreneurs down here. There's also a lot of retirees down here. But overcrowding has become a big reason to why a lot of people are leaving. But it's not just about congestion. Infrastructure is struggling to keep up, and in South Florida, we pretty much run out of land and the only direction left to build is up. So this vertical growth has put the most strain on the people who lived here the longest. Longtime residents feel this difference in a way that a lot of transplants just don't. And everything is relative. Ask somebody who just moved from New York City. They'll step off the plane and probably think this place isn't crowded at all. Then ask somebody who's lived here for 20 or 30 years and they're definitely gonna tell you this is not the South Florida that they're used to. And for some people, the overcrowding alone is enough to push them out. But for others, it's not the traffic, it's not the overcrowding, it's not even the cost. It's the hurricanes, which have always been a part of life down here and really the entire state of Florida. But the last few years have made it a little bit more personal. And I'm not just talking about our daily summer rainstorms or the occasional flooded street. I'm talking about billion-dollar storms, ones that can change the face of a neighborhood pretty much overnight, and the insurance headaches that come along with it. And while hurricanes and flooding aren't anything new to Florida, I think these last 2 storms that happened in late 2024 just kind of pushed a lot of people out of the state or made it so people just don't want to move here anymore, especially if you're not used to something like that. So the question is, if people are leaving, where are they going, and what does this tell us about South Florida's future? Well, some are leaving the state altogether, whether it's the Carolinas, Texas, Tennessee, somewhere affordable, maybe with a somewhat similar lifestyle, but at a much lower cost, while others are heading back home to New York City or the Northeast or California because maybe Florida just wasn't what they thought it would be and it just didn't fit their long-term vision. But here's what the stats don't show. A lot of people aren't actually leaving Florida at all. They're just moving within the state, whether it's Orlando, Tampa, or the Treasure Coast. So Florida is still growing, just not to the levels that it was 3 years ago. And because of this, your strategy needs to shift. So with all these changes, where does this leave Florida's future? Well, it's gonna look a lot different than it did from 2020 to 2022. And we're moving from that crazy boom market to more of a balancing act. So instead of that explosive growth, we'll probably just start to see a steady trickle. But if you're living here now, you should still expect positive growth, whether it's population or home values, just not at the levels we've been seeing. If you're moving here and planning on buying a home, you have all the leverage in the world right now. We're in this strategic window of opportunity, and with prices still being pretty high and rates not coming down just enough yet, you actually have home options to choose from, unlike 2022. So make sure to set realistic expectations when it comes to these costs, whether it's home or insurance. For real estate overall, demand will still be here, but it's probably going to be more targeted. Certain neighborhoods and markets could see more competition, while some of the overpriced or overbuilt areas on the coast may cool off. So sellers are gonna have to get more strategic and buyers are gonna have to think beyond living on the ocean, especially when it comes to value. For infrastructure, the pressure's not gonna go away. But if this growth does start to even out, these cities may actually have a chance to catch up without constantly being overwhelmed. Will that actually happen? I don't know, but it could. So we might see some relief, but overall, we're still gonna be dealing with a lot of the same challenges. And for the overall vibe of Florida, we might be heading into a phase where it's the cheaper alternative to New York and LA, and actually the place where people really want to come down here and build a life for themselves. But that also means that Florida is going to have to compete harder with those other states that are taking people away from us. And that's kind of a new challenge that Florida hasn't had to face in a while. In other words, the migration wave isn't ending, it's just kind of changing shape. And how we handle this next chapter will determine whether Florida remains the dream destination or just another stop on the way to somewhere else. And if you're watching this thinking, I need to get out while I can, or maybe you're ready to set some roots down here, we'd love to help you. So if you're thinking about buying or selling anywhere in South Florida, my team and I would love to be your real estate resource of choice. So make sure to reach out to us at therealsouthflorida.com/YouTube or scan this QR code to get started, and we'll see you next time.